Today we dive into a document that raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when a private company possesses more spying capacity than a small state? Welcome to a new deep dive from Strategic Labs. Remember, you have the original links in the description. Today we are actually looking at a pretty chilling stack of research, honestly.
Yeah, chilling is the right word.
Right. I mean, we've got investigative leaks, we've got foundational texts on modern military strategy stuff from The Intercept, Wired, Bellingcat, MIT Tech Review, plus themes from books like Corporate Warriors and Surveillance Capitalism. We are trying to understand this massive shift that is, well, happening right under our noses.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack this whole, the privatization of intelligence and strategic security, because, we've all grown up with this baseline assumption.
The assumption that the state is the only one doing the spying.
Right. The state holds this absolute monopoly on intelligence. Like, when you picture a spy or a global surveillance operation, you naturally picture the CIA or Mossad or MI6.
Right, guys in trench coats, backed by tax dollars.
Yeah, backed by national flags. But the thing is, that monopoly is totally fracturing. The power to watch, to influence, and to, wage these invisible wars is quietly migrating into the private sector.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how we got to this point of, like, invisible digital wars, we really have to look backward first. We need to trace how warfare itself actually transitioned into a corporate business model.
Yeah, and the privatization of violence, it isn't some new concept that was just invented in Silicon Valley. We are looking at a trajectory that spans centuries.
Right, this goes way back.
Way back. Think about medieval Europe. Lords and kings who just didn't want the immense crushing cost of feeding and housing a standing army year-round.
Because armies are incredibly expensive to maintain.
Exactly. So they would just hire independent fighter companies for like a specific summer campaign. And then fast forward a bit and you have these massive colonial enterprises like the Dutch or British East India Company.
Oh yeah, they were basically their own empires.
They really were. These weren't just trading firms. They effectively operated their own navies and controlled entire regions of the globe just to, maximize shareholder profit.
Right, so it's essentially like extreme corporate downsizing.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of a company outsourcing its human resources department or like its IT help desk, a sovereign nation is outsourcing its literal military operations to the lowest bidder.
That's a great way to put it.
But the modern inflection point, the moment this really accelerated, seems to be the end of the Cold War, right?
That is the exact catalyst. Global powers looked at their massive million-strong militaries and realized they were just a colossal economic burden now that the existential threat of, global nuclear annihilation had cooled down.
Everyone wanted to save some money.
Right. States wanted a peace dividend, so they slashed defense budgets. But of course, global conflicts didn't actually stop.
So governments had this math problem. They needed to project the exact same amount of power but with way fewer official troops on the payroll.
Precisely. And the solution was externalization. And it started, innocuously enough, with logistics.
Like supply chains.
Yeah, you don't immediately outsource the infantry. You start by outsourcing the cafeteria. Private contractors were brought in to build the bases, to cook the meals, and maintain the vehicles.
But then things changed in the Middle East.
Very quickly. During the prolonged wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that scope creeped massively. Suddenly, private firms like Blackwater or DynCorp weren't just cooking meals, they were providing armed convoy security, training foreign militaries, running tactical operations.
Which fundamentally changes the incentives of war, if you think about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you're a state military, your mandate is national defense, right? Or stabilizing a region. But if you're a private corporation, your mandate is just to maximize profit, renew your contracts, and deliver value to shareholders. That completely changes your risk calculation.
It changes everything.
A private military company isn't trying to win a war and go home. Going home means the revenue stream ends.
That is such a crucial distinction. And we saw this evolve even further with entities like the Wagner Group in recent years. They provided this sort of template for how a state could project hard power like securing resource mines in Africa or holding territory in the Middle East without ever officially committing state troops.
So, as one of our sources points out, war stopped being just a state function. It literally became a service.
It became a service you could just procure.
But physical mercenaries with rifles, that was really just the pilot program for what we're talking about today. Because the battlefield itself fundamentally shifted from physical force to digital information.
Right.
And this is where the dynamic moves from the corporate warrior to the digital mercenary.
And this is where the definition of a weapon changes entirely. Information isn't just an asset you protect in a vault anymore. It's a weapon you deploy.
So we're talking about a totally new kind of industry.
Exactly. We're no longer just looking at private armies. We are looking at this sprawling ecosystem of digital mercenaries. Firms specializing in offensive cyber capabilities, massive data mining, open source intelligence, or OSINT and psychological profiling. Firms like NSO Group or Cambridge Analytica.
Let's talk about the actual mechanics of that, because the capabilities of these digital tools are just profound. Take Pegasus spyware, for example. I mean, we hear the term spyware, and we immediately think of the 1990s.
Right, someone clicking a bad link in a spam email.
Yeah, getting a virus on their bulky desktop computer.
Uh-huh.
But Pegasus operates on a completely different, almost invisible level.
It really does. The old model of hacking required you to be a sort of digital vampire. You had to invite the hacker in by clicking a malicious link or downloading a bad file. But Pegasus utilizes what's known as a zero-click exploit.
It totally bypasses the user.
Completely.
Wait, so how does a zero-click actually work? If I don't click anything, how does my phone get compromised?
It weaponizes the phone's own background processes against it. Think about when someone texts you an image. Before you even open the message, your phone's operating system naturally tries to process that data to generate a little preview thumbnail, right?
Yeah, so you can see a tiny version of the picture in the notification.
Exactly. Well, a zero-click exploit hides malicious code inside that initial data packet. The mere act of your phone trying to be helpful and pre-render the image executes the code.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so before you even pull the device out of your pocket, the malware has rooted itself deep in the operating system. It gains full access to your encrypted messages, your camera, your microphone, and your real-time GPS location.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the company that develops this doesn't just use it for themselves, they license this capability. So a government doesn't need to spend 20 years and billions of dollars training cyber operatives at some elite intelligence academy to compromise a high-value target.
No, not at all.
They just buy a software subscription. Wait, so you're telling me a tiny country with a big enough checkbook can instantly wield the cyber power of a global superpower just by signing a vendor contract?
That is exactly what is happening. The barrier to entry for world-class espionage has completely collapsed.
It's just wild to think about.
Right. Historically, building a global surveillance apparatus required satellite networks, deep cover spy rings, and massive bureaucratic institutions just to process the intelligence. Today, you just buy it off the shelf. Like the text says, intelligence stopped being an institution. It became a market.
I want to pause on another mechanism here because it's not always about highly sophisticated malware like Pegasus, right? Sometimes it's just about aggressively mining the data we all willingly broadcast. You mentioned open source intelligence, or OSINT.
Oh, absolutely. The democratization of intelligence gathering is staggering. Specialized private intelligence shops don't necessarily need to hack into a classified database to track a covert military unit.
They can just buy commercially available data, like that whole fitness tracker incident a few years ago.
That is the perfect example. A popular fitness tracking app published a global heat map showing where all its users were running, basically just to show off their global reach.
It was supposed to be a marketing stunt.
Right. But suddenly, independent analysts at places like Bellingcat realized that in the middle of completely barren deserts in the Middle East, there were glowing loops of activity.
Wow.
It wasn't highly trained state hackers who exposed classified off-the-books military bases. It was literally just soldiers jogging around the perimeter with their smartwatches and a private company aggregating that data.
Or tracking private jets. We've seen private researchers track the movements of state intelligence agents just by cross-referencing public flight logs and commercially available smartphone geolocation data.
Precisely. You are seeing private individuals and corporations matching and sometimes exceeding the analytical capabilities of state intelligence agencies. And they're doing it simply by using data you can buy on the open market or scrape from the internet.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, if a tiny nation or even a corporation can just buy superpower-level cyber tools and data analytics off the shelf, the power dynamic fundamentally flips.
Oh, totally.
Because we're looking at a scenario where the companies selling these tools actually possess more power than the government's buying them. It's the tail wagging the dog.
This asymmetry is one of the most significant geopolitical shifts of our time. You have governments trying to operate within the rigid, slow-moving bureaucratic confines of the 20th century.
Lots of red tape.
So much red tape.
Meanwhile,
Elite private intelligence firms and big tech platforms are operating at the speed of modern data flows. They have a massive inherent structural advantage.
because they control the underlying fuel. They own the data itself.
Yes. In almost every scenario, these private companies possess vastly more data, superior algorithms, and better analytical capacity than the actual states they serve.
And the talent, right.
Exactly. They attract the absolute top engineering talent because they can offer massive corporate salaries and equity that a government intelligence agency simply cannot match. But more importantly, they build and control the actual infrastructure. They own the servers, they lay the undersea fiber optic cables, they write the code for the platforms where all of the world's communication lives.
It's like a city hiring a private company to build and manage its entire municipal water supply. But the company refuses to hand over the blueprints. Sure, the mayor's paying the invoice and standing at the podium thinking they're in charge. But if the contractor decides to change the water pressure or install bypass valves or simply shut off the main pump, the city is completely helpless.
And the mayor doesn't even know where the pump room is.
Exactly.
That's exactly how the architecture functions. The state thinks it's buying a tool, but it's actually creating a total dependency. We call it vendor lock-in in the tech world, but here we are talking about vendor lock-in for national security.
Which is terrifying. And it's not just theoretical espionage either. We are seeing private entities indirectly shaping major geopolitical events.
Right.
Take the evolution of psychological profiling and influence campaigns. It's not just about stealing a trade secret. It's about manipulating the host population.
Look at the mechanisms behind data-driven election manipulation. Private firms aren't just buying ad space anymore. They are using deep psychographic profiling. They ingest millions of data points on voters, what they buy, what articles they hover over, what groups they join on social media.
And then they target them.
They run algorithms to identify exactly which emotional triggers will sway a specific demographic. A state government usually doesn't have the internal capability to build that kind of granular psychological weapon. They have to hire a private firm to do it.
So the state might hold the formal ceremonial authority. They have the flag and the anthem. But the private firm holds the functional power. Like the text says, in the 21st century, controlling information can be more important than controlling territory.
It really is.
If a private company is providing the intelligence that dictates foreign policy, or running the algorithms that secure the voting machines, who is actually running the country?
Which brings up a massive operational crisis. Because if the contractor holds all the leverage, what happens when things go wrong? Usually in a dispute between massive entities, you turn to the law. But the reality of this landscape is that the law practically doesn't exist. It's the Wild West of cyber war.
Right, because international law, things like the Geneva Conventions or the various treaties that govern armed conflict, they were engineered for a completely different century.
Exactly. They require physical armies.
Geographic borders,
Yep.
clearly identifiable state actors wearing uniforms.
And they struggle immensely with the digital domain. I mean, how do you even define an act of war in cyberspace? If a power grid in a major city gets shut down by a piece of code, no shots are fired. No border is physically crossed by a soldier.
So, what does this all mean? If a digital mercenary hacks an election, who actually goes to an international court? The CEO of the tech firm, the coder who wrote the malware, or the government who quietly paid the invoice?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. The attribution is an absolute nightmare.
Let's trace a hypothetical supply chain for one of these digital attacks. Let's say country A wants to cripple the banking sector of country B,
Okay.
but country A doesn't want to use its own military hackers. So they hire a private intelligence firm headquartered in country C. That firm then executes the hack using a botnet of compromised servers physically located in country D, E, and F. When the banks go offline in country B, who do they actually declare war on? Whose laws apply? Who issues the subpoena?
Exactly. The jurisdiction web is just impossible to untangle. And the critical thing to understand here is that this isn't just a failure of the legal system to catch up with technology. This ambiguity is a deliberate feature of the system.
Wait, really? It's on purpose?
Yes. States actively choose to use these private firms precisely because it offers the ultimate geopolitical currency, plausible deniability.
But isn't that a massive strategic risk for the state?
Yeah.
If they use a private contractor scattered across multiple jurisdictions through shell companies, they completely lose operational control.
They do.
If that contractor goes rogue or decides to double dip and sell the intelligence to a rival nation, the state can't exactly call the international police. They've handed the keys to their national security over to a mercenary.
It is a colossal risk. But it's a calculated gamble that states are more than willing to take. They trade operational control for political cover. Let's look at the mechanics of that deniability. If an official state intelligence agency, say the GRU or the NSA, is caught directly hacking into a foreign government's servers, it's a massive diplomatic incident.
It's an act of war.
Right. It's a direct act of state aggression that can trigger severe economic sanctions or even kinetic military retaliation.
But if they use a proxy,
If they hire a private third-party firm to write the malware and launch the attack, and that firm eventually gets caught by cybersecurity researchers 6 months later, the state just shrugs.
wasn't us.
Exactly. They issue a press release denying any involvement. They claim it was a rogue criminal group or an independent contractor acting outside their mandate. It provides incredible flexibility to run extra-official, off-the-books cyber operations without facing direct geopolitical consequences.
So if a digital mercenary actually hacks a national election or cripples a hospital's IT infrastructure and holds it for ransom, the reality is that nobody goes to an international court.
No one.
The CEO of the tech firm points to the client. The client claims total ignorance, and the coder who wrote the malware is insulated behind 3 layers of corporate anonymity. The sheer complexity of the supply chain acts as this impenetrable shield against liability.
The ambiguity serves the powerful, and this total lack of accountability forces us to rethink a fundamental concept of how we organize the world: sovereignty.
Yes, the very definition of what makes a country a country. If physical borders can't stop these invisible incursions, and international laws can't regulate the actors, we really have to completely redefine sovereignty for the digital age.
For centuries, classic sovereignty was defined by very tangible physical markers. You drew a border on a map. You stationed a standing army on that border. You controlled the physical territory, the rivers, the mountains, and the resources within it.
The logic was simple.
Right. If you controlled the land, you controlled the nation.
But today, the true markers of a nation's independence aren't just geographic. Modern sovereignty is defined by data, isn't it?
Exactly. Let's ground this in the everyday reality of how a modern nation actually functions. Think about the infrastructure that keeps an economy alive.
Okay.
The undersea fiber optic cables that process trillions of dollars in banking transactions every single day. The cloud servers that hold the tax records and medical histories of citizens. The biometric databases that store fingerprints and facial scans. The algorithms that curate the flow of information and news.
If a foreign entity, whether that is a rival government or some invisible, multi-jurisdictional private corporation, has backdoor access to that data or controls the hardware that routes it, your physical borders are completely irrelevant.
They are just lines drawn on a piece of paper. If someone else can shut down your hospitals with ransomware or manipulate the emotional state of your electorate with a keystroke, you are not truly a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
It honestly doesn't matter how many tanks you have parked at the physical border.
The real territory being conquered is digital, and the invasion is happening right now, inside the phone, sitting in your pocket.
And this fundamentally changes how we must visualize national security threats. We are conditioned by history books to look for armies massing at a border or naval fleets approaching a coastline. We look for visible signs of aggression.
Right.
But the new mercenaries don't arrive in ships. They don't wear uniforms. They are already inside the networks that sustain our global economy, our politics, and our personal communications.
It's a silent occupation. You don't realize you've been conquered because the invaders are just lines of code operating invisibly in the background. And that leads to the most unsettling part of this entire shift.
Which is?
Well, when war and intelligence were strictly state functions, there was at least a mechanism for public debate.
Oh, right. You had parliamentary oversight. You had defense budget hearings. Journalists could file freedom of information requests. Voters had some semblance of a say, however imperfect it was, in how their nation conducted itself on the global stage.
But in a market-driven intelligence landscape, those mechanisms completely vanish. The decisions that shape global geopolitics, the operations that sway elections and target individuals, they're made in corporate boardrooms now.
Completely insulated from the public.
Heavily insulated by non-disclosure agreements, proprietary algorithms, and trade secrecy laws. The tools of statecraft have been commodified, packaged, and placed entirely out of public reach. which leaves all of us in the dark. We are the subjects of the surveillance, we are the targets of the influence campaigns, but we aren't even in the room when the contracts are signed.
It's a sobering reality.
Do you think states still really control information? Or has power already migrated to invisible corporations? We have reached the end of this extensive analysis. If it added value for you, share and subscribe to Strategic Labs.